Hello, everyone who's online. A warm welcome to the first online event of Ascension 2020. So, you guys must be wondering what Ascension is, right? So, it's literally India's one and only medical humanities conference organized under the aegis of Dr. Manu V.L. Kothari, Chair of Medical Humanities Department of St. G.S. Medical College. Like, it's better known as KEM, right? So, here's a short video about our principles, vision, and aims. All right. So, as you guys could see, we are guided by many prestigious people from the field of medicine. And the video basically encases all that we stand for. Okay. So, you guys could see more about this on our channel. We've added the link in the description.
Yeah.
Now, moving on to our first event, I would like to welcome our guest speaker for today, of course, Dr. Siddharth Warrior. Sir did his UG from JJ and postgrad from KEM, all right. So, and he went on to become a renowned neurologist. Also, besides being an excellent physician, he has excelled in arts, especially poem. Having deep roots in neurosciences as well as arts, Siddharth sir is the perfect person to shed light on today's topic, how the brain creates art. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Dash. It's always surreal being introduced on your own channel, but this is a wonderful experience. Also, watching that video gets me a little nostalgic because I was in KEM for a wonderful 3 years from 2012 to 2015, and I haven't had the pleasure of learning under Dr. Kotari sir, but then I've heard so much about him. And I have had the pleasure of meeting Dr. Pandya sir and of course Dr. Salagre sir and Smriti ma'am. I have learned under and I have worked under them. So it's yeah, it's wonderful to be back here. It's wonderful to be associated with my college, and yeah, I think it's a pleasure to give this talk. I hope you all enjoy it. I hope that everybody who is joining in also enjoys today's discussion. It's a topic that is very close to my heart because I feel that it is something that merges the two, my main two interests, which is neuroscience and art. So that is what I'm going to do. I hope that everybody enjoys, and we are going to have this discussion in the same way that we have all our other discussions, that everybody in the chat is welcome to keep participating in the talk. If there are any questions that you want to ask, if there are any points you want to make, please feel free to do that, and I will be picking it up, and we will keep including that in the talk itself. And same goes for Mrinmay, Darsh, you too. If you want to hop in and participate in the discussion at any point, you can. All right. Okay.
Definitely.
Cool. All right. So then, if chat allows me, then we shall start. Let's talk about art. Let's sort of begin right at the start and think of what does it mean when you think about art, when you think about what is art. I want to hear right from the beginning, what do you guys think when I say, are you an artist? Or when I say that, do you like to see art? What does that thought create in your mind? You can switch on your audio, by the way. Like if this is going to be a conversation, if I'm able to see you, then I should be able to hear you.
Yes.
Yeah, Mrinmay, you too. Feel free to switch on your audio. So
I believe art is an expression of the abstract thoughts that we have that we can't describe in words, perhaps. In some cases, yes, like poetry and stuff.
Yeah.
But the abstract thoughts we have,
that's very true. So that word is excellent. Abstract thoughts. So one of the I was reading up on art, and one quote that really jumped out at me was this one that said that art does not reproduce the visible, it makes the invisible visible. So that is sort of exactly what you said in different words, that it is art sort of brings the abstract things to light. And the minute you think of that, you realize that art is there in almost everything around us. Every aspect of our lives is touched by art. So when the music that you hear is art, the clothes that you wear, the t-shirt that you're wearing was at one point an art form. Somebody designed that t-shirt for the first time and said that, look, I've created something new. And while it is there everywhere now, at some point it was an art form. The movies that we see, the paintings behind you, the photographs hanging behind your wall, these are all art forms. And then you realize that art is so ubiquitous. It's everywhere, right? So the thing that makes me wonder is, when we think of art, we think of the big ones. We think of Leonardo da Vinci making Mona Lisa. We think of Shakespeare writing Hamlet. We think of J.K. Rowling writing Harry Potter. We think of, or going all the way back, the Neanderthal man making cave paintings. That is also art. What is common? If we are trying to understand art itself, what is common between all these things? How can we try to understand art if there is such a spectrum? If people from all across time and place are all artists, how do we even begin to understand art? Because it is too broad, it is too wide. So where is that starting point? How do you start thinking about it?
Expressions, I believe.
Okay.
It's a sort of an expression.
That is true. So it's something that you want to express from your own personal life. Very valid point. When I started thinking about this, I realized that you can divide it into two ways. One is there is a very specific story to every art form, every artist, every artwork. So there is a way that if Leonardo da Vinci made Mona Lisa, we can try to understand it from a sense of who is Leonardo da Vinci, when did he make it, why did he make it, at what point in time did he make it, what was he thinking about. Now that is the story of that specific art form. But if you zoom out a little bit, you realize that there is also a universal answer. There is one thing that is sort of common across all artists, all art form throughout time, and that is that everybody had the same neural networks. Everybody had the same kind of brain, and all art forms came from that brain. And as soon as you start thinking about that, you begin to have a common point. You begin to have one platform that, okay, from here I can begin to understand art overall, right? So that is the purpose of today's talk. The way we are going to understand art is from that common point. We are going to take neuroscience, we are going to hold on to it because it is the only constant thing, it is the only consistent thing in this world of chaos, and we are going to take that and slowly unravel everything we can in the art world. Is that okay?
Yes.
Awesome.
Yes.
All right. So let me share my screen and then let's get this discussion going. And let's see what chat is saying. Purva is saying that art is expressing our emotions, bringing what's inside of you outside for others to see. Exactly, Purva. That is exactly what art is supposed to do. Art is anything which expresses us. Sometimes we can't express by words. Sakshi, you're absolutely right. If there is a way that if there's something that needs to be expressed in your language, if your words are coming incomplete, then so-called art will help you express that. And Ritu saying it's basically a medium of communication. So everybody's sort of on the same page. Everybody kind of understands what art is, but let's see what is the neuroscience behind it. So we've already decided. So you have Da Vinci, you have Shakespeare, you have who else did I say? You have J.K. Rowling, and you have the ancient caveman making the cave paintings. And all of them, the only thing common between all of them is that they all had this. They all had the brain, and they all had the same lobes of the brain. So all of them had a frontal lobe, all of them had a parietal lobe to see the things around them, all of them had an occipital lobe for vision, and all of them had a temporal lobe for storing their memories and keeping their emotions. So this is the common factor between all artists across time. And in fact, one interesting thing is that in the last 20 to 30,000 years, the brain hasn't really changed much. So the brain of the earliest Homo sapiens till today, so your brain, my brain, is pretty much the same. So if you take out a fossil brain and you examine our brain, you won't be able to tell much of a difference. It's still approximately the same shape, the same volume, the same weight, and the one way to look at it is that the hardware is the same. So in the last 30,000 years, the hardware has remained the same. The only thing that is evolved is the software. So the way we use it, the way we use these networks, the way we use this this wiring has constantly upgraded, but the capacity has remained the same. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. So this is why I feel that neuroscience is actually a great way to begin to understand art, because it gives us that common ground. Now let's talk about how does the brain perceive art. So before we talk about creation, let's talk about how does the brain appreciate art. So when I show you a piece of art, how do you get it, right? So that's sort of where I want to start off with. Now let's see what chat is saying. Rajat, you are lefty. No, Rajat, I'm not. It's just the mirror camera thing that shows that I'm writing with my left hand. I'm actually a righty. Brain ko busy kaise rakhe. So art is its way of surpassing ego and superego. Oh, that's a nice comment actually, Yash. So Darsh, Mrinmay, a few days ago we discussed psychiatry, we discussed Sigmund Freud, and we talked about id, ego and superego, which is Sigmund Freud's way of dividing and understanding human behavior. And id is the primary
desire and willpower to do it.
Correct. So it is like the primary desire thing, and superego is your the one that tells you what should be done, what shouldn't be done, and ego tries to balance everything.
Inhibitions that you have.
Exactly. So that's an interesting way of saying that art is its way of surpassing ego and superego. So it's like what Yash is saying, that it's like your limbic system trying to express without being constrained by the modern rules of what should be said and what should not be said, which is very interesting because I'm going to try and remember that and come back to it later, right? Okay. How does the brain perceive art? The easier question is, how does the brain perceive anything? Okay. So now let's talk about perception. So if this is you, sorry, I couldn't draw you in a more detailed way, but let's assume this is you. Then everything you perceive comes in through one of your 5 senses. Correct? You either see something, you hear something, you touch something, you taste something, or you smell something. Everything comes into your brain through one of these senses. And at some point, you become aware of it. Which is, so when you see, for example, if you see a tree and this is you, at some point you look at this and say, oh, this is a tree. But between these two events, there are a lot of things that happen. So you might wonder why I'm talking about this. Why is this important? But this has got everything to do with perception of art. So that is why we're going to spend 2 minutes just discussing on how we perceive the world, right? Because art is a subset of the world. So we have to understand how we perceive the world at all before we talk about how we perceive art. Now, the first thing that happens is that between you and the tree, there is the brain and there is the eye. Okay. So the first thing that happens is that the light rays from the tree hit the eye, and at the back of the eye is something called as the retina. Now you guys are all familiar with the retina because you are all doctors, but there will be people in the chat who might want to know more about this. So the retina is the layer of the eye that is at the back. So all the light waves that hit your eye ultimately end up in the retina at the back, and it hits the retina as photons. Now this is very important because the tree might be a complete structure, but by the time it hits your retina, all those light waves that are reflected off of it will hit your retina as multiple millions of photons. And the retina will then divide these photons and send them to your brain. Now, for the first time, we are going to be talking about the part of the brain that is at the absolute behind, called as the occipital lobe. And the function of the occipital lobe is to see. You guys already know that, or you should know that, but chat, the occipital lobe, which is at the back of your brain. So when you tap the back of your skull, you're actually tapping the occipital system, and here all those photons will get sent to the back, and the occipital lobe has multiple layers. And what the occipital lobe does is, eventually it has to combine all these millions of photons back to the tree. And art happens here. Why does it happen? So at the absolute back of the occipital lobe is layer 1. And what layer 1 does is, it is something called as the simple cells. And the simple cells have a very simple role. It will only see straight lines and curves. So when you see a tree, the curves and the straight lines are all assessed by the simple cells. And then once the simple cells analyze the straight lines and the curves, it tells the next layer to talk about more complex stuff. More complex stuff like color, movement, and edges. So gradually, as this impulse gets sent forward more and more complex stuff get processed. And by the time it reaches the layer that is at the absolute front, the final tree gets formed. Now just hold on a second. I need to enable slow chat because there is some kind of spam. All right, coming back. Where are we? So we saw the tree. The tree was burst into multiple photons. The photons went to the back of your head in the occipital lobe. The occipital lobe started putting those photons back together. Slowly, in the first layer, only the simple cells were there. They decided on the straight lines, and the complex layers added curves. They decided, is the tree moving or is it still? And it decided that where are the edges. Now the final tree has been formed, but we still don't know that this is called as a tree. And so this final form will get sent to two places. It will get sent to the temporal lobe and the parietal lobe. And the role of the temporal lobe is to decide the what. So what am I looking at? And the role of the parietal lobe is to decide where. So where is this thing? So think of how important this is. Imagine that you are a rat in a jungle and you see a tiger or a cat. It is so important for your brain to quickly put together that shape of the cat, decide that this is a cat, and at the same time decide where is the cat. How far is the cat? Is the cat moving towards me or is the cat moving away from me? Because your whole survival depends on this. Similarly, in this case, when we see a tree, we see what is this thing that I'm seeing. So the temporal lobe compares this image of the tree to its previous memories, and it comes up with two conclusions. One, that this is called as a tree. So the word tree, that itself is a memory, and this is called as lexicon. And second is the meaning of the tree. So what does this image mean? So this is called as semantic. And you put these two things together, and then you sort of start to realize, what am I looking at? So when I show you a mobile, you need to understand that this is called a mobile, and B, that what is this used for? So what is its purpose? So that is how you understand the meaning of something. And the parietal lobe will say, where is this tree? The funny thing is that you still don't know that this is a tree, because your conscious awareness is here in the frontal lobe. And all of these things are happening here. So finally, the occipital lobe has told the parietal, the temporal, and then finally these two will send the impulse to your frontal lobe. And here in your prefrontal cortex, you are finally aware that, hey, I'm looking at a tree. And this is where you decide context. This is where you decide what is your opinion about the tree. Are you happy at seeing the tree? Are you sad at seeing the tree? Is this your tree or is this somebody else's tree? All of these things are put together in the prefrontal cortex. Okay. Now, I realize that I have taken a lot of time just to explain how we perceive things, but let's try and understand why. Why is this so important? The reason is that when you look at anything, what you are seeing and what is so-called reality are not the same thing. So reality might be this, but think of the number of layers that reality has to go through before you are aware of what you are seeing. So the tree has to go through the eye, the retina, the occipital lobe, the parietal lobe, the temporal lobe, and then finally it will reach your awareness. So at any level, at any one of these multiple levels, and this impulse is getting continuously modulated, at any one of these levels, your reality can change. Right? And this is why I like to call it as units of reality. And we use the example of vision. We use the example of you seeing something, but the same thing applies to something that you hear, something that you touch, something that you taste, something that you smell. For smell less, but especially for seeing and hearing, whatever is hitting your eyes or hitting your ears, that thing gets split up into millions of pieces, and your brain basically puts it all back together and then gives you your version of reality, which is sort of a freaky thing to realize, because that means that all of us are kind of seeing slightly different versions of the same thing, because it is up to your brain how you pull it apart, and it's up to your brain how you put it back together. Okay. And depending
we can say,
on, yeah,
maybe we can say that we never really know what the real thing is.
Exactly. Because how would I know what you are seeing? It's not possible. I can only see my version of what you are seeing.
Red might be something else to you, something else to me.
Exactly. Exactly. And if that is what we've been seeing for your whole life, that becomes your truth. Right? And
so, sir,
yeah,
would that account for differences in perspectives and thoughts when we look at the same thing?
absolutely. Absolutely. So when we say that, when we ask each other, you see what I'm saying, we are actually asking a lot, because it's very difficult for two people to see the same thing, because they've had to have the same life experiences, the same, and even then it might not be the same thing. So
Right.
but the interesting thing is that in spite of this, we have learned to cooperate so well. So that is why it is so amazing that we can forget about fighting. It's amazing that we aren't fighting all the time, because we all have slightly different versions of reality. Right? And how is this connected to art? If there is a reality, which there is, let's not get too confused. There is a reality out there. It's just that we all have individual versions of it. But if there is a way of seeing it, there is usually a normal way of saying it, or rather an accepted way of seeing it, and there can be multiple alternate ways of seeing it. So like I showed you here, the way you split reality and the way you put reality back together and you create your version of it, if your version is considered as normal, everybody agrees that हाँ ठीक है, if I show you a mobile and if everybody says this is a mobile, that's it. That is how we have all agreed that this is how we will split reality and put it back together. But if you say that this is the end of the world, that doesn't sound right. That is not my reality. Why would you say that mobile is end of the world? That is such a weird way of saying it. How did you do that? How did you split that reality of the mobile and put it back together to form a meaning of end of the world? Now, if you call mobile as end of the world and say you describe this, you talk about it, the more you describe it, the more it becomes art. Because now what you have done is you have created another way of looking at the same reality. And now if you write about it, or if you draw a sketch of the world and one big mobile phone and it is killing everyone, this concept remains the same, but now you are expressing and you are showcasing an alternate way of looking at reality. And this is just one way. So as soon as I say alternate, I mean close to infinite, I think. Because there are infinite ways of splitting reality and putting it back together. And that is why there are infinite art pieces. Because everybody puts reality together in a slightly different way. So if you are really, really keen, then you can say that everybody is an artist. But the differences has to be the differences are usually very small. So if we both agree that this is a mobile, then there is very little difference. So between the two of us, neither of us is an artist. But if one of us is seeing it in a different way, then that makes it art. Okay, now what is interesting in this whole discussion is that this is my version of reality. So this is how I see it. And you can never escape that, because whoever is saying anything is telling you their version of it. And this is an inescapable truth. So ultimately, you can either agree with me or not, and that becomes your version of truth. Does that make sense? Yeah. So let's go a little bit deeper. Let's go a little bit deeper into what the brain does. And I'm going to see if chat is still with me. I'm going to see if this was all making sense to them. Purti is saying this is exactly how artificial neural network also works. Purti, that is very interesting. So I think Purti is teaching machine learning and artificial intelligence at Goa. So then that will be very interesting to talk more about. Hariom is asking at this time, what is the role of thalamus? So thalamus has a very important role to play. So this splitting, where does this go? The part of the brain that does the splitting of reality is done by thalamus. So the thalamus is kind of like the traffic cop. So everything, all the traffic that is coming in, the thalamus says, okay, you go here, you go here, you go here. So thalamus is actually what does the splitting. So that's an interesting question. Ram Arvind could have drawn a better brain, I'm sure. There are infinite ways of drawing this. Ayush Krishna, please mention the name of the other two. Yes, I will. I'll add you guys. I'll add both of your names on the live stream title. Okay, novelty of perception is not the only criteria of art. That is true, Divyakratu. There are so many layers of art that to think that we can break it down into one line would be optimistic, but we have to start from somewhere. Because when something is very complex, one of the challenges is that you don't know where to start from. And so you find it easier to not go into it at all. You think that ye to ho hi nahi payega, this is too much, so let's not start at all. But I agree that art is extremely complex, but maybe it need not be. We can, in our own version of the truth, we can have a simpler version of art and then go into the complexity as we get more and more comfortable. Yeah. And Dheeraj has asked, are dreams art? Dheeraj, that's a very interesting question. Dreams are art because okay, we are going to get to that. Can you guys remind me of this question later about dreams? Yeah, I have a couple of interesting thoughts on that. All right, now let's go a little bit deeper into the brain and let's talk about the two sides of the brain. Yeah. So you both know there are two sides of the brain. There is the left side and there is the right side. Now, I'm curious as to what people already know about the left and right side. I know that there has been a lot of talk about this. So are you a left brain person? Are you a right brain person? So what do you guys think about it? What do you guys think of the two sides of the brain?
Everyone has a dominant hemisphere, right? So the dominant hemisphere is concerned with the cognitive functions. The other hemisphere is concerned with the more artistic functions.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's a fair way of saying it. So when we say dominant, the term dominant came because the left side was found to be more involved in language, right? So the left side was involved in language to the extent that the left side understands the units of language. So if I say that hi, how are you doing, the meaning of the individual words the left brain will put together. But what is sort of not so clearly understood is the role of the right brain in language. And it's still not fully understood, but sort of what the right brain does is, once the left brain has understood the meaning of individual units, it sends this information to the right side. And the right side decides how to put these units together. So if I give you 7 colors, the left brain will decide what color is what, and the right brain will decide how to put them together to form a pattern. And which is why it's not really fair to say that language is in the left side, because you can't function without either of these. If you don't know what the individual units do, then there's no point in putting them together. But if you can't put them together, then what's the point of knowing the individual units? It's sort of like that. And so whenever you come across anything, now if you see that if there is reality, and that reality goes all the way back to your occipital lobe, and from the occipital lobe that reality gets sent forward to the temporal lobe, the left side temporal lobe will understand the units of reality. It will send it to the right side temporal lobe to understand the pattern, and then both of these lobes will talk to the prefrontal cortex and then say that, listen, these are the individual units, this is how I have put things together, and now you tell me, what do you think about this? And the prefrontal cortex, it's not a one-way street, so it often talks back. So the prefrontal cortex says, no, I don't like this way that you've put it together in a different way. And so the right side of the brain can literally, okay, sorry, let me put it together in this way. Is this more acceptable? So it's literally like you are at a clothes store and saying, ye koi aur color mein nahi hai kya? So then the right side of the brain says, wait, let me see what I can do. Let me see if I can arrange reality in a way that is more comfortable to you. So this brings me to another interesting point about reality, is that it is constantly getting modified to suit you. So if you are somebody who likes things in a particular way, then your brain is making sure that the arrangement is happening so that you are happy, which is why you actually end up ignoring a lot of stuff that you don't want to see. which is one of the most unfortunate and the fortunate parts of the brain, because it is trying to protect you, but it is also stopping you from experiencing a lot of things that you don't want. So this is where all the yeah.
Does Love is Blind this exactly is the same thing, right?
Yes, so Love is Blind does come in here. The way you value things. So when you are in love, initially, that first, क्या बोलते हैं, like जब प्यार पहली बार होता है and all that stuff. So then that person will mean everything to you. So they can do no wrong. Whatever they do is okay. So there is a lot of reality that your brain is just suppressing, saying this is ignore.
Ignoring the red flags, basically.
Yeah, I mean, look at the red rose. Don't look at the red flags. This is a better reality for you. So yeah, so that is what the right brain does. And so literally, what the role of the right side brain is to make sense of patterns. Now, Divya Krotu has asked a very, very nice question. How important is corpus callosum in creating art? And Divya Krotu, I love that you asked it. So, corpus callosum, let me ask the medical students, what is corpus callosum?
Connection between the two hemispheres.
Correct. So, there is
Bridge of the brain.
Yes, bridge of the brain. So, there is sort of like a gateway between the two sides of the brain, and this is called as corpus callosum. And the role of the corpus callosum is literally to allow the two sides of the brain to communicate. So there are millions of neurons continuously talking to each other from across the gateway, and they are constantly talking about udhar kya chal raha hai, idhar kya chal raha hai. And they are constantly exchanging information, saying that, okay, I have understood this unit. How will you put it together? Because this track, let me show you in color. So this track is also not a one way. So this everything is bidirectional. So if the left brain understands the units and gives it to the right brain will be continuously giving feedback. Like, okay, I have understood this pattern. Can you give me more units? Or are you sure that these are the units, because these don't make sense to me? So at any point, if there is a block, it can go back and say ki, no, you change it. And then yahan pe agar block hai to it will go still further back, and occipital lobe ko bolega, nahi, you see it differently, because this is not making sense.
It's like when you can't believe what you're seeing, so you look again.
Exactly. So that is why the first time you see an art form and the 10th time you see an art form, or the first time you hear a song and the 100th time you hear a song, it's very different, because now your brain has settled. It has now settled all those impulses into recognizable patterns. So now you're comfortable. Whereas the first time you see something, you might be like, what is happening? I can't understand. Kya ho raha hai? You know? So that is literally your brain learning and figuring out how to see reality, or how to experience reality, right? Okay, now let's see what chat is saying. Aviral Shringi, a little out of topic, but can you tell me how to deal with sudden panic attacks and anxiety as I deal with them? Aviral, yes, very out of topic. We are going to talk about anxiety on a separate stream. Let us try and focus on art. Although art therapy has a lot of potential, actually. I mean, I don't think I'll have the time to discuss it now, but yeah, I mean, since you brought up anxiety and panic, it's interesting because both anxiety and panic stems from seeing the world in an uncomfortable way. And there are defense mechanisms that your brain comes up with, like denial or suppression, which is essentially, if you are scared of something, you might not see it, or you might not accept to yourself that you have this problem, which is your brain modifying reality, editing reality, so that it can make your life more comfortable. And art therapy actually allows you to see the world in a slightly better way. So that's interesting that you did bring it up. So it's not very out of topic, But yeah, we'll talk about this more on a different day. Now, okay, are you guys with me so far? Does this make sense? Yeah.
On this note, sir, we could talk about the Rorschach ink blot test,
Yeah.
maybe.
Sure.
I'm concerned.
So the idea of Rorschach is very similar in that if I give you like random squiggles, right? And if I tell you that, okay, you see this and you tell me what it means, if you keep staring at this, what is going to happen is that your brain is slowly going to pick up patterns, because initially it will make no sense. And then you keep staring at it, you keep staring at it. What is happening is that your brain is trying to fit, it is trying really hard. Initially it's just nonsense, but you keep staring at it and it will start picking up one curve here, one line there, and gradually you will start seeing a shape. And what is happening is that your brain is breaking this reality apart and putting it together in a way that only you can. Because that shape that you are seeing is completely dependent on your life experiences, your history, your neural networks, right? So Purti has said it is a flying dragon, which is very interesting because like now that she said it, I can also see it. Like I can see that, okay, like this could be the wings and this is the tail and so to speak, but then everybody will see it differently. And this is the fundamental concept of Rorschach test. Of course, there is a lot more complexity to it, but this is the fundamental concept. And it's a great example to give because this is how reality gets broken down and put back together. So already chat is going a little nuts. So Mridula seeing a stingray, Shreya seeing a bird struggling with wires, Rajat is seeing a bat, Akshita seeing a bird speak. So this is a psychiatrist's dream. Like it's just, I can. Yeah, Mrinmay.
So what does that mean when we say, like, we look at certain arts and your response of thought is always something relating to your personality or how you're feeling at that moment of time?
Yeah.
So how is that connected to the neuroscience part of it?
No, I'm not sure I get that. Are you asking like how what we are perceiving, how is that connected to neuroscience?
No, I'm saying is sometimes when we look at a piece of art, like many people say, what you feel looking at the piece of art is mostly what you're feeling deep inside. For example, if I feel happy looking at it, that means I'm a happy person. If I feel that. So how would that be connected?
So it's such a circular question because emotion and your perception and how you want to see things is like a loop. So this has happened so many times, right? Like, so you are in a very happy mood and you hear a song for the first time, and later on, every time that song plays, you go back to that moment, right? So if say you heard a particular song on your first date and you were very happy, then even 10 years later when you hear that song, that memory will come. It can work the other way around. If you are feeling very sad and you hear a song, even if that song is a happy one, now suddenly it is associated with a sad memory, and so every time you hear that song, you get triggered. This is what trigger means. Like you get triggered by it. Not just songs, any memory. So people who have broken up in a train will then not want to travel in a train. I mean, I keep saying breakup, but any trauma basically. But you associate any random things together. You can associate a place, you can associate a song, you can associate a particular dress, that okay, this dress was worn during this time and I don't want to ever wear it again, or vice versa, you want to wear it again. So this is just your brain connecting two random patterns together that actually don't have anything to do with each other, but then your brain did it anyway. Right? Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So now let's talk about, okay, let's use this example of the Rorschach test only. What if you you are walking through an art gallery and you see this, okay, and people are telling you that this is a $2 billion artwork, which you can't be surprised in today's day and age. You can't say ki kaise and all that. It's possible. Now somebody says that this is worth 2 million. What do you do? How does your brain process that information?
I try to figure out what the artist thought when he drew about this, so like what his thought process was.
Yeah. That's, yeah. I mean, after saying, क्या इसको 2 million, ये तो मैं भी बना सकता था, ये तो मेरा कुत्ता भी बना सकता था. Like that is all the usual reaction that I've seen people give in modern art galleries. But after that, like once you move beyond that, what you do is what your right brain does is it tries to make sense. And initially it is that same reaction. You can't make sense. It's not fitting into your perception of reality in any way. And so the only conclusion is that this is wrong. And then you will come up with many reasons, like many reasons why this is wrong. You'll say that this doesn't make any sense, ye to koi bhi kar sakta hai, all of that. So those are all reasons for you to justify why you think it is wrong. And the reason you think it is wrong is because your right brain cannot make sense of it. But slowly, what if your right brain does come up with some sense or some form of explanation? And this could be anything. This could be just by yourself, like you keep staring at it and you start seeing something that you didn't before, which is very possible, because if people can see a dragon in this, anything is possible. So gradually, as you keep staring at it, you will come up with some form of explanation. And so it is not a complete nonsense anymore. Now it is some sense, maybe. And gradually then you will go and read the description below the painting that this artist made it. So now you have a name, you have a person attached to that painting. So now you have one more layer of context. Now it is not just some scribble, it is a scribble made by Picasso, for example. Now you've heard of Picasso. You've heard that, okay, he's a very famous painter. So now there is some layer of context to it. Then you read that, okay, he made this during the Spanish World War. So now you have one more layer of context. Then you say that he made this painting 1 year before he died. So that means that he has made it after all his life experiences. That is one more layer of context. Gradually, you keep on adding more and more layers of context. And what is happening is that your right brain is now putting it together in a pattern. And eventually you will feel like, oh, this makes sense. And what this line means, this makes sense, is absolutely subjective. It makes sense to you. And it makes sense to you now. 3 days ago, 3 weeks ago, 3 years ago, it made zero sense to you. But now it makes sense. And so now for you, it is art. It comes down to that. And what is very interesting is that if this is an artist and the artist has seen the world in a different way, and he or she has created something to showcase what he has seen in a different way, then the first feedback is to the artist himself or herself. So if I create a poem and that poem makes sense to me, then it is art to me. And then I show that poem to somebody else, and that somebody else says, this is absolute rubbish, I can't understand anything, what is this, get lost. Then that art remains art only to me. But on the other hand, if the whole world says, oh wow, this is art, then it becomes universally approved art. Okay? So in its simplest form, art is subjective. To make it slightly philosophical, all truth is subjective, and it is all depending on if everybody agrees that this is true or not. All right. Okay. Now, coming back to the right side of the brain, we spoke about how the right side of the brain puts patterns together. Now, what is interesting is that this is a skill. So putting a pattern together, or rather seeing a pattern, is not a fixed thing. So your ability to see a pattern when you are 15 is very different from your ability to see a pattern when you're 25, 35, 45 or 5 years old. So your right brain, just like every part of your body, is continuously learning. And whenever the brain learns something, and whenever the networks in the brain changes, there is a term for it which is called as neuroplasticity. So plastic, when something is plastic, it means that it can be modified. And neuroplasticity is when the nerve cells, the neural networks themselves are changing. So neuroplasticity can happen at multiple levels. Every time you learn something, there is some amount of neuroplasticity happening. And neuroplasticity happens maximum in childhood because you have a lot to learn, right? But it never stops. So even if you're 25, 35, 50, 60 years old, depending on how much you allow yourself, your neural networks will keep learning. It will keep forming new connections. What happens usually is that as we grow older, we close down the neuroplasticity. We say, bas ho gaya. We have very fixed concepts. We say कि ये ऐसे ही है, ये ऐसे ही होना चाहिए, which is unlike what you said when you were 5 years old. So at 35, you say कि नहीं, I have seen life. This is how things are. And so what you're doing is you are actually shutting down neuroplasticity. Whereas if you keep that mind open, what it means, what does that mean, keeping an open mind? It literally means that your brain is continuously forming new connections. So every time you hear something new, if your neural networks are closed, then that new thing will have nowhere to fit into. But if your neural networks are still fluid, that new thing can just fit into it, and your networks can change and adapt to fit this new piece of information into this existing truth, right? So there was a quote. Have you guys heard of Ramon Cajal? Have you read Robbins? Sure, of course you have. You have underlined it also. You're KEM students. Your book is underlined cover to cover. But he is the most famous neuropathologist. Okay, and you might have seen his name, Carl Cells, and all of that. But
yeah, you're right.
Yeah. So yeah, if I would have given you 4 options in an MCQ, you would have cracked it. But what this guy has done, you should read about him. He's very, very impressive. So in the 19th century, he said this line: every man is a sculptor of his own brain. Now just think about his level of insight, because this was at a time when neuroscience was at its, forget infancy, like it was not even conceptualized much. And at that time he understood the concept of neuroplasticity because he saw that neural networks were reforming after damage, and after a stroke neural networks were forming again. And what he meant by this line is that you can create your own brain, you can create your own neural networks, and when you create your own networks, what you're actually doing is you are deciding how you want to see the world, which is incredible because it's kind of like a superpower. If you can change the way you perceive reality, that is a superpower, and it is something that every one of us has. And especially in children, which is why children can adapt to anything. So a child who is born in a particular family will adapt to that family and will become like that person. He or she will grow up believing that religion system. He or she will grow up believing that social values, because children can adapt to anything. But as you grow, that sculpting power becomes lesser and lesser, and that thing just condenses into this is world, this is the world, this is reality, right? Basically, we create our own reality. And this is where what I meant by we are all artists, because at some level we have created this. So you have a worldview, Mrinmay, you have a worldview, Darsh, you have a worldview, and you might not be able to explain it, but it is seen in every action you take. It is seen in every choice that you take, because there are certain things you believe in, there are certain things that you say you hold as truth. ये हुआ मतलब यही होना चाहिए. That is your worldview, and that has been formed at some level because of society, because of things that you read, things that you saw, and your own decisions. And all of those worldviews are sort of coded in this, in the patterns that your right brain makes, right? Now let's come back to art. If there is an artist and that artist perceives reality, that reality comes into him in all these 5 senses, and you can take something you see, something you hear, something you touch, taste, and take that reality and break it apart and say that instead of this, I'm going to make it this. So instead of a circle, I'm going to make it into a square. And depending on the medium, your art form will change. So for example, a painter will take the colors in front of him and rearrange them and paint it in a different way. A musician will take the sounds around them and rearrange them in a different way. A poet will take the words around them and rearrange them in a different way. Each one of this is an art form, but each one of these people are doing the same thing. They're taking reality, putting them apart, and putting it back together in a way that is unique to them, which is why every art form is unique, but every art form is kind of similar in that they're all doing the same thing. Okay, now just talk to me. So I think we have covered a lot already. What do you guys think? Chat, what is happening? What are you guys talking about? Oh god, they're talking about neural links. Wait, let me catch up. Pranav is saying our smartphones are able to emulate all our sensory organs except smell, which is the only sense that can bypass the thalamus. That's true. So smell does not go through the thalamus. I hope you guys both knew that. Mrinmay, Dash.
Yes, we do.
Yes, it's a very favorite Viva question. What are the key differences in your olfactory senses as opposed to the other ones? Ashmit is asking, is the validity of truth based on the public perception of it? Isn't truth regardless of what people think? Ashmit, that is a good question, but this is what the whole discussion was on the primary observer. So right from Einstein's physics theories, there was a continuous discussion, and now quantum physics is dealing with this. So the whole Schrodinger's cat thing is based on this, that if there is no observer, what is truth? So it's like that whole cat in the box, is it alive or is it dead? Similarly, it applies to every level of truth. If something happens in an island somewhere, did it really happen? And I don't obviously have an answer to this, but it's something to definitely remember that as far as we know so far, truth is subjective. I mean, that is what, as far as I have read, I think I have to conclude that, because how can it be not? Everything that you perceive ultimately has to go through the filter of your brain. There is no way that you can circumvent that filter, because that filter is you. So there is kind of like a funnel there, and everything has to go through that. So yeah, but it's definitely an interesting thing to discuss more. Sakshi's asked, so left-handed and right-handed person in the dominant hemisphere, that concept does really work or not? So most left-handed people still have their left side of the brain as the dominant side. So this rule of left understanding the units of language and the right seeing patterns, that is true even if you are left-handed. Only in some people it is the opposite. And do we really perceive any smell or taste as art? Do we really give that much effort on these senses? Absolutely. I think the whole world of cooking as an art form is based on taste and smell as an art. So I would definitely hold it as that.
Also, sir, we might discuss about the few autistic people having the savant syndrome. They have different, they can music is art to them, and like they can visualize all of it. So that's
somebody had asked about synesthesia also, and
yes, sir.
So the idea of basically when you take in information, that, like I said, that information gets split into units. So if you are hearing something and also seeing something, you might not give the same amount of priority to each sense. So in a case of an autistic spectrum disorder, the way your networks are connected is slightly different. And so for some people, they might be more comfortable with one sense than another. So for some people in the ASD spectrum, they will be more comfortable with colors and not at all comfortable with touch. So if somebody touches them, they might be very uncomfortable. Somebody else might be more comfortable with touch, so they will want to touch, they will want to hug, and then they will be much more comfortable in that situation. So it's, I don't want to go too deep into it, but essentially this is how it is, that it is the way that your networks are connected, and more importantly, they have a little bit more trouble learning new ways of connecting the world. So they will keep learning everything, but they will learn it within that same comfort zone, and they have trouble expanding their comfort zones, which is why the world has to be edited and made sure that, so if somebody is more comfortable in music, they have to spend more time in music. So that is sort of part of arts therapy, but yeah, that is how ASD works. It's a very interesting topic. I think I will go into it more, but yeah, I think that's a discussion for another day. Yeah. Let's talk about what happens when we perceive art. Okay, and we're going to talk for like 20 minutes more and then wrap it up. Is that okay?
Yes.
All right. So when we perceive art, so now we are not the artist anymore, we are the audience, and this is an art form. So it is just a board with 3 random red lines. Okay. And again, this is at a modern art gallery, and this is worth $1 million, just to annoy you. So then you perceive this. Now, as I said earlier, you think this is, what is happening? I don't believe this is worth all that. And then you finally sort of make sense of it. And you are like, oh, wow, this completely makes sense. Now, what happens is that in your brain, because now you have made sense of something that you did not understand before, but now you did, your brain gives you a reward, and this reward is the form of dopamine. So this is applicable to all art forms. So when you hear music and you can sing along to the music, your brain is rewarding you continuously. Every beat that falls into place, every time a pattern overlaps with another pattern, your brain is giving you a reward saying, well done, you have predicted it correctly. Well done, you have figured it out. So this is why every art form gives you pleasure. So when you're watching somebody dance, when you're watching somebody sing, perform, when you're watching somebody play, even sports for that matter, when you're watching somebody play cricket, or when you're watching somebody play football and they're doing it very well, in your brain you are getting a reward because the pattern fits with your level of expectation, which is why even sportsmen are artists, because they create something. So I would definitely hold Federer as an artist, because he has done things that I have not seen happen. And Messi, the way he plays in certain situations where you've never seen that happen. So you have an expectation of how football should be, and then when he does something that completely breaks that expectation, what is actually happening is that you are seeing reality in a new way. And so in that moment, Messi is an artist. So every time you create a new way of looking at reality, you have just created art. Now let's look at some other examples. For example, language and poetry, right? So we all know, the reason I like this example is because it is something we can relate to. Now you've never played football like Messi has, but then we've all used words. You know English. So technically, you are also capable of making poetry. But not all of us do. At least not all of us admit to doing. I have a theory that all of us have written a poem at some point in their lives, but none of us admit it until you absolutely have to. But I can already see Mrinmay remembering the poems she has written. But it's the reason that everybody writes a poem is because I feel that everybody's right side of the brain does do that exercise of, let me see if I can rearrange reality in my way. And the most accessible reality for your left brain is words, because that is the one that you know the most. Not everybody plays around with painting and color. Not everybody plays around with instruments, but words are something that we all have. And so poetry becomes the most accessible form of art. Now, if you remember, what are the poetic devices? Do you remember from your grammar? What are the poetic devices?
Yeah.
Tell me.
Personification and
Lovely.
Onomatopoeia.
Okay. Wait, I'm pretty sure that's pronounced differently.
Wait, no.
It's
supposed to pronounce it.
Yeah, is that correct?
Yeah, I think so. Like I had a way of remembering the spelling this way.
What is it? Onomatopoeia. No, onomatopoeia.
Yes.
Yeah, I have always had trouble with the word. Yeah, so let's just say Ono for short.
Yes.
So yeah, I think there are a lot of them. Metaphor, simile, tautology, alliteration, absolutely. Right? So have you ever thought of why are they poetic devices? What does that mean that these are poetic devices? So what is it? So let's take alliteration, because it's probably the simplest one. What is alliteration?
When the same alphabet is repeated.
Correct. So all around, so A. So it's all, you're starting with the same letter. Now, in the simplest way possible, this is a pattern. Correct? So when you are repeating the same letter, that is a pattern. What is metaphor? Or rather, what is simile? Let's talk about simile. What is a simile?
Same meaning.
Same meaning. So I say red like a rose. Right? So now what have I done? I've taken a color and I've taken a rose. Oh God, my rose looks like a tree. I'm sorry. But let me just write rose and not embarrass myself. Okay. Red like a rose. What we have done is, we have taken a color, we have taken an object, and we have put it together, right? And we have put it together exactly. So this is another pattern. Now tell me about metaphor.
Seeing this thing is something else.
Correct. So it's sort of like a simile, but a little bit more complex. So we are actually comparing two different situations, and we are talking about one, but we are talking about two situations, situation 1 and 2, and we will continuously talk about the first situation, but it's almost like we are meaning to talk about the second situation. For example, my relationship has hit a speed breaker. you immediately understand what I mean by this. But the words themselves make no sense. What does that mean? There is what speed breaker? That has no, it doesn't make any logic. But you have immediately understood it because we are comparing a relationship to a, say, a car ride. Right? Somebody has said hit a rough patch. Absolutely. You also say we are going too fast. We are going too slow. These are all part of that metaphor where we compare a relationship to a car ride, which actually there is nothing similar. They are completely two different life experiences, but our brain finds a way of putting this pattern on top of this pattern and finding all the ways in which you can merge them, right? And so this is also a way of patterns, forming patterns. Personification. You are giving an inanimate object a personality. You are giving a pattern. So at its simplest level, poetry is just layers of patterns. And how good the poem is sort of depends on how you break down reality. You break it down and then you put it back together and arrange them in patterns. And how well you do it. So if you have only one pattern, so you have a metaphor and that's it. Your whole poem is that metaphor, then that is, your poem is as good as one pattern. Now that pattern might be executed very well. So that is different. But now if you go back to the traditional forms of poetry, say sonnets or say ghazals, just think of the amount of patterns that are there in a sonnet or a ghazal. I'm not sure if you're familiar with either of them, but in a sonnet, there are 14 lines. Okay. So 4 lines, 4 lines, 4 lines, and 2 lines. And each one of those lines will have 14 syllables, 14 or 10 syllables. So every line has to have the fixed number of syllables. So that is one pattern. The rhyme scheme has to be same. So it's probably ABAB or ABCB. And the last 2 lines will also be BB. So that is another pattern. The third pattern will be the meaning. So the meaning of the entire poem will be formed in a particular flow. So that is a third pattern. So as you go on adding more and more patterns, the complexity of the art keeps getting higher. So somebody who's just starting out reading a poem, a sonnet might not make sense because their right side of the brain is wondering what the hell is happening. So for them, a child, Twinkle Twinkle Little Star is perfect because twinkle twinkle is alliteration, little star, how I wonder what you are. So star and R are rhyming. So that is another pattern. Your childlike brain is very happy. And some people will stop there and they will not go ahead because it is not possible to go ahead in all art forms. But then the more you read poems, the more you start appreciating higher complexities of art. Okay. And this brings me to my second last point of grades of art. So there is one layer absolutely close to you where everything makes sense. So you don't have to worry at all. As soon as you see a pattern, your brain has decoded it. It is very simple. The problem is that here you don't get much joy out of it because your brain didn't have to really work. Then there is a layer where things didn't make complete sense, but you tried a little bit and now you have started seeing the pattern. Here you get a lot of joy because here you are like, okay, I have tried, I have solved it, and now I've understood. And then finally you have a layer where nothing makes sense. So here also you don't get any joy because this is too difficult. So how your brain perceives art is, your brain will only perceive art in this layer where things are slightly weird but understandable when you try. Anything too simple is not art. ये तो obvious है. इसमें क्या art form? ये कुछ नहीं है. And you go too far away and this doesn't make any sense. ये क्या art form है? I can't understand anything. So you need to find art in this blue layer, and this is subjective. because as your brain, right brain, keeps getting better at seeing art forms and seeing patterns, this blue layer will keep increasing, right? All right, I think that I think the last bit of what I wanted to say is that I'm going to end it with Pablo Picasso, and he said something that every child is an artist. And I think that that is a great line to just think about, because if you think about a child, when a child is growing, everything is new, every experience is new, but that child has so much curiosity that the child wants to break that pattern and bring it together in a way that makes sense to him or her. So almost everything that the child sees is an art form. And that is what curiosity means, that, oh, what is this? How can this be? Can this be done differently? Can I see this in a different way? And as you grow, society literally stops that. Like, don't do that. Don't see it like that. Don't. And I understand why, because if everybody does everything in that curious sense, society can't really function. But you also now need to remind yourself that curiosity,
every once in a while you should think about that.
Exactly, because this sense of curiosity is what leads to art, because you need to want to break down things and put it together just for you, just to try. Because if you don't do that, then you'll be very, very stuck in a specific way of looking at things, right? And so you won't be able to see art and you won't be able to create art. Does that make sense?
Yes.
All right. I think that's it. I think that's all I wanted to say.
Mrinmay had something to say.
Yes.
Yes, sir, I wanted to thank you so much for this insightful talk.
Thank
I'm
you, Mrinmay.
sure it has changed all of our perspectives now. Like every time somebody is going to look at art, they're going to think all of those things that you just said. It's
I'm glad.
lovely to know all that.
Thank you so
And
much.
you've showed us that art is not so much just as a pastime hobby, but it's even more deep, meaningful.
Yeah.
And I would also like to thank Lopa ma'am, Sunil Pandya sir, Padmaja Samant ma'am, and our dean, Dr. Hemant Deshmukh,
Yeah.
for this constant encouragement and support, which gives us the ability to conduct such unique events like this for our colleagues. And lastly, I would like to give a big thank you to the audience. Your enthusiasm and love towards Ascension is the biggest driving force for us, and we hope that you stay with us throughout our journeys. Also, we're open to any suggestions from the audience or regarding what future topics they would like us to make events on. So we're totally open to that. And thank you.
Thank you, Mrinmay. Thank you, Darsh. This was a wonderful opportunity to connect with my, I can call you my alma mater, sort of.
Yeah, yeah, you can.
All right. Yeah, Darsh, were you saying something?
So anyone who wants to check out more talks like this, like we can, you guys can go on to our channel. It's in the description.
Yes. So I have added some links in the description. Please check out our Ascension's YouTube website and Instagram channel. And I think they're planning to have a few more in the next 1.5 months, and they will all be on interesting topics. So I think that'll be worth your while. Aditya, this increasing complexity is so multidimensional in movies. Yes, absolutely. So in all art forms, now if you go back, you will be able to appreciate grades of art in everything. So a photograph has grades of art, a poem has grades of art, a music has grades of art. So in every art form, there is simple layers of simple and complex. And it also depends on you. It's subjective to you. So I think that's beautiful. And there are a lot of questions on other topics like sleep, REM. I think that we will take these questions on a different day. But yes, so dreams, I think, yes, I want
Yeah. I would
So
remind you
I
about
would, so the reason that I want to talk about dreams is that very similar things happen in dreams. So when you are sleeping, your overarching control of your prefrontal cortex on what to think and what not to think sort of relaxes. And so a lot of your memories start forming new connections when you are sleeping. And that is what happens in dreams. So there is a lot of creativity that happens in dreams. So there is a lot of similarity between dreams and childhood and daydreaming and curiosity and art. So all of these things are basically states of mind where you relax your control over yourself and you just let new connections form. Yeah. All right. I think that was a good note to end this talk on. Whoever has not liked the video, please do that. Whoever is not subscribed to my channel, please do that, and go on Ascension's channel and please subscribe there as well.